Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this conversation, and I'm going to talk this way. Welcome to this conversation with Bernie Sanders. They say that the older you get, the more conservative you get. Well, that's not the case for our guest tonight. The older he gets, the more angry he gets about the uber-capitalistic system, as he calls it. And that's why Bernie Sanders has written the book, It's Okay to be Angry About Capitalism. Het is oké om kwaad te zijn op het kapitalisme. Het allitereert lekker in het Nederlands. Is change going to come? And how does that change look like? And the book is not just a critique, it offers a blueprint for progressive change. It calls for a political revolution in which working people come together to fight for a government that represents all Americans and not just the 1%. Just a quick question to start. Who of you here is angry about capitalism? That's a lot. That's a lot of people being angry. Welcome, I would say. This event is organized by the scientific bureaus of the Labour and Green Left Party, Wetenschappelijk Bureau GroenLinks and the Wiardi Beckman Stichting, in cooperation with Bot Publishers. I'm Eveline van Rijswijk. I'm a political historian and I will be your moderator this evening. What will we do? We will start with a short lecture by Bernie Sanders. Then I will interview Bernie Sanders and Frans Timmermans. Then we have representatives of our special guests, FNV, or the Netherlands Trade Union Confederation, and Greenpeace. They will ask some questions. And then, of course, you will get the opportunity to ask some questions yourself. I don't think everyone can ask a question tonight. But let's start with Bernie Sanders. He is serving his third term in the US Senate and is the longest serving independent member of Congress in American history. He ran two of the most progressive grassroots campaigns for president in modern American history. As a chairman of the Budget Committee, he helped write the American Rescue Plan, one of the most significant pieces of legislation in modern American history. And as the newly elected chairman of the Health, Education, Labor and Pensions Committee, or HELP in short, Sanders will fight for Medicare for all, for combating climate change, and for making public colleges and universities tuitions free. Any students here in the audience? Great. Please give him a warm welcome, Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you. And I am announcing my candidacy for Prime Minister of Holland. There you go. If I only got this kind of response in the United States. All right. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. What I wanted to do before we begin the discussion is to say a few words about some of the issues that I consider to be of extreme importance in the United States, and I think there's going to be an overlap to some degree in Europe and in Holland. In some degree, in some cases, they will not be. For example, in Europe in general and in Holland in particular, you do a reasonably good job guaranteeing health care to all of your people. In the United States, our healthcare system is an unmitigated disaster. It is broken, and its main function is to make huge profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. So as someone who believes, as most Europeans do, and most Americans, that health care is a human right, guaranteed to all people, that's a fight we're going to be waging in the United States. The first issue I want to talk about, and one of the things that we did in the book, in a sense, is to say that in many cases, the more important the issue is, the less it is discussed. Trivial issues, you know, somebody in politics in America saying something dumb, which we all do, or this or that conflict, you know, becomes a front page story and for a long period of time. But some of the real structural long-term crises that absolutely need to be addressed get almost no discussion at all, and there's a reason for that. So the first point that I want to make, that I hope we all can focus on together, is that, in my view, in the United States, and I think around the world, we are moving toward an oligarchic form of society. What does that mean? It means that never before in human history have so few had so much wealth and so much power at the same time when many people, working people, lower income people, are falling further and further behind. And one of the reasons that this issue of massive income and wealth inequality, one of the reasons why we don't talk about the growing concentration of ownership in this world and in the society, is because the people who own the media are part of the problem. So in America, you have 8 huge media conglomerates that control about, 90% of the American people see, hear, and read. And they kind of determine what the news is, what we're supposed to be talking about. But in terms of oligarchy, let me just say this. In America today, 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. In America today, 3 large Wall Street firms, collectively together, are major shareholders in 95% of American corporations. Meanwhile, in the world, not just in America, since COVID, the last few years, 63% of all new wealth created on this planet, about $26 trillion, has gone to the top 1%. All right, almost two-thirds of all new wealth has gone to the top 1% at a time when people all over the world are falling further and further behind. Their wages have not kept up with inflation. And obviously in developing countries, there are too many people who are literally going hungry or living in extreme desperation. So that reality, that in this world today you have an oligarchy, not just in Russia, not just in China, not just in the United States, not just in Saudi Arabia, but all over the world, of a few thousand people with incredible wealth and power, is an issue that cannot be avoided. And it's not an issue that people feel comfortable talking about. I was on an airplane a couple of weeks ago, and one of the flight attendants came up to me and was a strong supporter, and she kind of whispered in my ear, "I heard a podcast. It's terrible, these rich people getting so much richer." She whispered it. She didn't want anybody to hear her. So it's an issue, I think, that people are uncomfortable for a variety of reasons in terms of talking about it. But what I want to say is that these people on top are not nice guys. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to give you some examples, and it's important that we understand this, and we must be prepared to take them on. Just a few examples. When I was a young man a few years ago, the United States Congress, long before I was involved in politics, the United States Congress brought the CEOs of the tobacco industry to Washington, D.C. And they took them before a congressional committee. Some of you may have seen the photos. When you testify before a congressional committee, you often have to raise your hand and you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. And these CEOs got up there and they all, oh yeah, we swear to tell the truth. And some congressmen asked them, so you're the CEOs of these large cigarette companies. Tell us, based on your knowledge as CEOs, does cigarette smoking cause cancer, emphysema, heart disease, and other health problems? The executives went down the road, I think there were 5 or 6 of them, major tobacco companies. Oh no, we have not heard that, or we don't believe that's true. No, scientists have never told us that that was true. In every instance, they were lying. They had the scientific evidence, they knew it, that cigarettes were killing people. In fact, my father smoked 2 packs a day and died at the age of 58, and that's true of millions and millions of people. They lied. In 2008, when we experienced the terrible Wall Street crash, which had a horrific impact on the American economy and the world's economy, you had CEOs on Wall Street who knew exactly what they were doing. They were selling mortgages that were worthless, and that eventually caused the kind of economic collapse that we saw. They lied. They knew what they were doing. Recently, more recently, in the last 10 years, you had in the United States drug companies, including companies like Purdue, who developed opiates that ease pain. That was the reason for these drugs. And suddenly they were getting information that there were small towns in West Virginia and America and elsewhere, people buying all kinds of drugs, all kinds of these opiates, way above the population levels of those communities. They knew that they were hooking people, getting people addicted to those drugs. They knew it. And you know what they did when they learned it? They hired more salesmen to sell the drugs. And most egregious, and I say these things not simply to tell you tales about this or that company, but to tell you a culture, a corporate culture which now exists in the world. And the worst and most egregious example of that behavior deals with the fossil fuel industry. Now, if some company, and it happens, I'm sure, every day, develops a product and they think it's a good product, say it's a drug, and then they learn that the drug has bad side effects, what responsible companies do, and many of them will do, is say, my God, we didn't realize that, take it off the market, address the problem. What I want everybody here to know, and I think many of you do, is that the scientists in the oil companies were telling the CEOs of those companies 50 years ago, 60 years ago, that carbon emissions were going to warm the planet and have a disastrous impact. And you know what the CEOs did when they learned that information? They proceeded to lie. In fact, they funded organizations to try to obfuscate the truth about climate change, come up with some theories like, well, the planet warms every few million years, it's just a natural course of event, or we're not really sure, maybe it's man-made, maybe it's not. They knew the truth and they lied. And the result of those lies was that the United States and the rest of the world did not move as aggressively as we should have, as soon as we should have, in cutting carbon emissions, and we are paying the price today. They lied. And I'm happy to tell you that there are officials in Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, California, elsewhere, and we're trying to do it in Washington, to hold these companies accountable. and to say that you lied to people all over the world, you are responsible for the hundreds of billions of dollars of damage that we are seeing, and you are going to pay that bill. But again, this issue goes beyond climate. It goes to a culture of greed, where despite the massive levels of inequality that we are now experiencing, these guys are not yet satisfied. You might think that if somebody was worth $10 billion or $50 billion, they would say, well, that's enough. I'm doing pretty good. I can take care of my family for a few thousand years. But these guys want even more. They are addicted to that greed. And I want you to know that, because it's an issue we don't talk enough about, but it's an issue that we have to deal with. And related to that is another issue. It's gaining a lot of attention in the United States, and I don't know how much attention it's gaining here in Europe, is the issue of artificial intelligence and robotics. But the truth is that for many, many workers all over the world, the jobs that they have today will not be there 10 years or 20 years from now, or they will be very, very different jobs. Now, in my view, technology unto itself is neither bad or good. It depends upon how that technology is used. If artificial intelligence is in a hospital or in a doctor's office and can pick up diseases or problems that people have, that's a good thing. On the other hand, if a worker is replaced by a robot and thrown out onto the streets with no recourse, that is a bad thing. Now, one of the economic phenomena that's happened in the United States over many decades, and I think explains why a lot of people, working people in America, are angry and frustrated with the system, is that today, the average weekly wage in inflation accounted for dollars for the average American worker is lower than it was 50 years ago. Average weekly wage in inflation accounted for dollars lower than it was 50 years ago, despite huge increases in worker productivity. So what that meant is that workers' wages went nowhere, and all of the new wealth that was created by that technology went to the people on top. And now we're looking at another revolutionary moment in the world's economy, in that robots are going to replace people, artificial intelligence is going to transform the workplace. And the question that we have got to ask ourselves is, who is going to benefit from that technological explosion? Will it simply be the owners of the technology and the corporations that utilize that technology, or will that increased productivity benefit ordinary workers? And one of the things that I will be doing as chairman of a committee which deals with these issues is, within the next several months, introduce legislation calling for, in the United States, a 32-hour work week. And the reason that I am doing that is that I want to make it clear that if workers are going to be more productive, be able to produce more, I want to make sure that they are beneficiaries of that change and not just the CEOs. And if you have a 32-hour work week, it means more time for family, more time for education, more time for leisure. And in America, I got to tell you, I think more so than in Europe, I know more so than in Europe, our people are very, very stressed out. I was just talking to somebody this afternoon who told me, I think, that every worker in Holland gets 5 weeks paid vacation. Is that correct? Plus other vacation times. We don't have that in the United States. All right. In fact, which is not to say that some jobs do have that, but that is certainly not the standard operating procedure. And in fact, there are some jobs in America, there are people in America, more than a few, who literally work 52 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. And on top of that, we have some 60% of our workers who are living paycheck to paycheck. And that means that you're really struggling to put food on the table, a roof over your head, take care of the medical bills, etc. People are living under a lot of stress. And if we could bring about a situation where the work week is reduced, people have more time to breathe, more time to relax, it will be a major step forward for human well-being in the United States. Another point that I want to talk about, which is an issue not only for the United States, but absolutely for Europe as well, and that is the very, very strong attacks that we are seeing against democracy. Democracy is a very fragile institution. From world history perspective, it is a reasonably new development, a couple of 100 years old. And what I can tell you is that in the United States, we have a former president, whose name I will not mention, who is working day after day to undermine the very foundations of American democracy and to push people into losing faith in the democratic system. But it is not just in America. That's taking place all over the world, including Europe. And we've got to take a deep breath and ask ourselves, how does that happen? Did the world not go through World War II and the horrors of Nazism in Germany and fascism in Italy and other parts of the world? What are we missing here? What are we not seeing? How do we address this issue? And I think it is important, vitally important for us to try to get a sense of the reason that people are turning toward autocracy and losing faith in democracy. And that is that all across this globe, lower income and working people are under enormous stress. In my own country, 85 million people cannot afford health insurance. They're uninsured or underinsured. Our daycare system is literally on the verge of collapse. Costs $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 a year if you can get a slot for your kid. I spoke earlier today at the beautiful University at Leiden, and I enjoyed that very much, talking to young people. And we discussed how much it costs to go to university here in Holland. I was told it was something like 3,000 euros, give or take. In the United States, to go to a good major university, it now costs $50,000, $60,000 a year for tuition, not to mention room or board. Could cost $100,000 a year. And the result of that is many millions of people have left school deeply in debt. Not unusual at all for somebody to graduate college, $40,000, $50,000 in debt. You want to become a doctor in the United States and you don't have any money? And I'm not exaggerating, you can leave medical school $400,000 or $500,000 in debt. America today, it's not just that we have 500,000 people who are homeless, sleeping out on the streets of major cities. Some 18 million households are spending half of their limited incomes on housing, which I know is a problem right here in Holland as well. Cost of housing in many countries around the world is soaring. But the point that I'm making is that when people feel desperate, when people lose hope, when people say, look, I can't afford health care, I'm earning starvation wages, I'm worried about my retirement because I have no money in the bank, and I'm looking at Washington, D.C., and I'm saying, what have you done for me? Do you know that I'm alive? Do you know that my kids will probably have a lower standard of living than I do? Do you know that my daughter died of an overdose of drugs because she couldn't find a decent paying job, was kind of giving up on life? Do you understand that in Washington? Do you understand that in national capitals all over the world? And because you don't understand it, you're not paying attention to my needs. Why am I going to worry about voting in your stupid elections? Because you don't care about me. And if we continue in America, and I speak only now in the United States, to turn our backs on the pain and suffering of tens of millions of working people, if we don't have the guts to stand up to a very powerful 1% that is getting richer and richer, and demand that we have an economy that works for all of us and not just the few, I worry very much about the future of democracy in my country and, frankly, in countries all over the world. Last point that I want to make is to paraphrase a quote from Nelson Mandela, who said, and I'm probably getting a few words wrong here, but he said, "Everything always seems impossible until it is done." You all know what that means? In other words, you look at the reality of the day and you say, my God, how do we deal with that issue? How do you deal with oligarchy? How do you deal with climate change? These are huge issues. And then after we solve those issues, everybody says, well, that really was, everybody knew what you had to do. No problem. The issue is that the ruling class of the world, and there is a oligarchy in the world, wants you to believe that the problems we face are more or less insurmountable. They want you to believe, despite that you are the vast majority of the people, you are powerless. Maybe you get a vote every few years, but you really have no power because they have the power. And what we have got to do in order to save the planet in terms of climate, in order to make sure that we move toward a world of economic, social, and racial justice, is we have got to organize, we have got to come together, and we have got to have the courage to tell the people on top that in this modern world, they cannot have it all. You know, for a very long time in Europe, you had royal families in Russia and all over Europe who were able to maintain incredible wealth and power because they told their constituents that they had no choice. They were kings and queens because of divine rights. God gave them those rights. And today, in many ways, what the billionaire class is doing is saying exactly the same thing. The billionaire class has divine rights. Well, in Europe, years ago, you dealt with the divine rights of kings. It is time to deal with the divine rights of the billionaire class. Thank you very much.
There? Yeah? Thank you very much. You probably don't know this, but before you came on the stage, I asked everyone who is angry about capitalism. I think they're more angry right now after your speech. Yeah. I would like to ask to the floor Frans Timmermans to have a conversation with you. Frans Timmermans is the party leader of the combined Labour and Green Left parties in the forthcoming general election campaign in the Netherlands. He's the former European Commission Executive Vice President of the European Green Deal. He's a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Minister of European Affairs and a former member of the Dutch Parliament. Please give him a warm hand, Frans Timmermans. Frans
Could we not
Timmermans.
ask you to come and prep the room every time when I need to come up?
Yeah, this is not really Dutch to cheer this hard, right? Yeah. Are you angry as well?
Yes, I am. I'm angry because we're facing a climate crisis that is going to affect the weakest in our society. And the right is now selling the anti-climate policy, pretending they care about the weakest in society. I'm angry about that. It's hypocritical. I'm angry about the fact that so many people in this country, especially young people, can't find any housing and have no prospect of finding housing. I'm angry that in this one of the richest countries on this planet, 800,000 people live in poverty. And that's simply unacceptable. And that's why I fully share Senator Sanders' agenda.
Yeah, but... Bernie Sanders, I think a lot of people are angry, but we need more, I guess, to turn anger into positive social change. How should we do that?
I would say the main point is a psychological one. If you feel hopeless, if you feel that the powers that be are just too powerful and they cannot be confronted, we will all be impotent and unable to bring the changes that we need. So the first point that we have to appreciate is that when you deal with the 1%, to understand, without being a PhD in mathematics, that 99% is more powerful than 1%. But we are not powerful as isolated human beings. We are powerful when we stand together around an ideology and a set of beliefs that work for all of us and not just the few. I was at Leiden, as I mentioned earlier, and one young lady got up and said, a lot of young people feel discouraged with the political process. The voter turnout among young people is not particularly high here or in the United States. What do we do about it? And the point is not just for young people, but for all people. It's not good enough to complain. You got to work hard. Politics is not easy stuff. I'm sure Frans will agree with me. It's tough stuff. You get setbacks every day. But at the end of the day, we got to bring our people together around an agenda that works for all, not just the few, and continue to be persistent. Fight, fight, fight.
I've heard Bernie now mention Leiden University several times. I have to, as great as that university is, this city has a university, boy. As a former professor of Utrecht University, I have to promote this university.
Okay.
It's really a great place.
How do you mobilize people who are angry? And how do you, they feel alienated, they've given up on politics at all. How do you...
Well, the thing is, it's not that hard to mobilize them. Look at the extreme right. They're very able at mobilizing angry people by telling them lies, by taking them down rabbit holes. So it's much more difficult to mobilize the anger of people for a positive agenda. And the only way you can mobilize people for a positive agenda is if you give them a perspective of hope, if you give them a perspective that by mobilizing you can actually change things for the good. Because what's happening now is that many people have lost hope, as Bernie said earlier, they believe in decline as the only way forward. So if that's your belief, then your anger can only be mobilized for a negative agenda. So the only hope we have as progressives is to convince people that we can actually handle this, that we can actually change the paradigm of inequality in society, that we can actually do something about the climate crisis, that we can come out of this stronger. As soon as we convince enough people that this is possible, we will mobilize the anger in a positive sense. Anger is a good thing if you translate it into positive action. It takes you down if it makes you cynical, if it makes you hate other people, if it makes you look for scapegoats. And that's what's happening in the radical right. It's happening in the US, it's happening all over Europe, and we have to stand up against that development. And only by bringing about a society that is more just, where people feel that there is equity, where people feel that people who can afford it will contribute more, and people who can't afford it, people in poverty, get more support. Only then can we make an improvement. I'll give you one example I had early this week with a very rich, successful entrepreneur who has a very strong social heart. And I asked him, if we were to tax your wealth with higher taxes than you have now, very unpopular message, how would this affect your life? How would that change your life? And he said, honest answer, not at all. If you give a person on a minimum wage or a person on benefits 100 euros a month extra, that changes their lives. And that's the way I think we need to look at society. Fair taxation doesn't change the lives of rich people, but it hugely improves the lives of people who are struggling today.
Bernie Sanders, whenever you talk about being angry about capitalism or we should change the system, everyone comes up with the question, okay, well, which system then, right? Let's make it more concrete. Do you think the way to go is to work with economic issues because the division is smaller than with cultural divisions?
Well, I would say two things. Number one, and now I speak just for the United States, the media portrays the country, correctly so, is very divided. No ifs, buts, and maybes about that. We are divided on issues like whether or not a woman should have the right to control her own bodies. We are divided on issues like guns. We are divided on issues relating to the gay community. But I'll tell you where we are not divided. The agenda that I and other progressives in America have presented is wildly popular, wildly popular. As Frans just mentioned, I would just mention it in a different way, but in the United States right now, billionaires pay an effective tax rate that is lower than a truck driver or a nurse. Nobody in America, whether you are right-wing conservative or a strong progressive, believe that that makes sense. In America, we're the only major country not to guarantee health care at all, and we spend twice as much per capita as you do here. Everybody understands that the system is broken. In America, we in some cases will pay 10 times more for a prescription drug than you pay here. Nobody in America thinks that that is appropriate. In America, we have a $7.25 an hour minimum wage. Nobody in America thinks that that makes sense. So there is an agenda out there that says that the time is long overdue for us to pay attention to the needs of the working class and not just worry about more tax breaks for billionaires. So that's point one. Second point that I would make, and Frans touched upon this, is human beings by nature want to understand what is happening. So if you're sick, you go to the doctor. Your first question is, doctor, why am I sick? What's wrong? And what are you going to do to make me better, right? That's what we do. And in society, it's not different. If I am stressed out, if I am struggling, if I'm unhappy, if my job pays me wages that are inadequate, if I can't afford housing, if I'm worried about what cell phones are doing to the mental health of my kids, I want an explanation as to why is all of that happening? Why am I in trouble? Why am I desperate? And what the right wing does, and what demagogues have always done, not new, they're playing out of an old playbook. You scapegoat minorities. Maybe it's Jews, maybe it's blacks, maybe it's the gay community, maybe it's the Muslim community, maybe it's the transgender community. You can pick it, doesn't matter. You scapegoat a minority group and you say, that is the reason why you are desperate today. And you put one group of people against another. And everything that I am fighting for, and I suspect Frans as well, is to bring people together, no matter what the color of your skin is or where you come from, around around a common agenda that works for all of us and demands justice in our society.
Thank you. Yeah. What should be that common agenda for the Netherlands if we have a criticism on the capitalistic system in the Netherlands?
Well, I've been traveling around the country for the last 6 weeks, and there's a couple of things I've seen. On the positive side, there's incredible show of solidarity amongst people. So wherever I go, you see people standing next to other people, spending their free time to support people who need support, looking after people who really need to be looked after, and doing a lot of volunteering everywhere. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, most people are very disillusioned in government. Disillusioned in how government treats people, disillusioned in the fact that government doesn't seem to trust people, treats them as potential fraudsters when they need the government support. That is a very, very strong feeling. So one of the first things we need to do is to reestablish trust in government. And you can only do that by first showing trust from government to citizens. This city has a wonderful example of this. In the Dutch rules for unemployment, for people under the age of 28, when they need government benefits, they have to wait for 1 month before they can actually apply for government benefits. Now, that month could be critical for a young person. They could get homeless, they could get into horrible debt, they could, resort to crime or drugs to just make it through the day. Now, this city has decided that's the national rule, we will not apply it. We will not apply it, we don't think that's fair. So a young person who needs unemployment, who needs support, because they're without income, will get support immediately if they qualify. That changes people's lives, that changes young people's lives. I spoke to a young person who was in the situation earlier today. Their lives have been changed for the good because they see government trusts me. They trust me not to be a fraudster. And I think we should, the example in the city should be applied in the whole of the Netherlands, because the assumption that it would attract people into benefits that don't deserve benefits is nonsense. The experience in the city shows clearly it doesn't attract people to benefits. Young people want to work, but if they can't find a job because they're struggling with their mental health or they're struggling with other issues, they need to get support. And this city shows how to do that, and at the same time helping them recover. I want the whole of the country to do the same thing, so we can find examples to do this right. And the other thing we need to do, we never had working poor. Today we have working poor. So we need to have a serious raise in the minimum wage. It's about 12.4 euros an hour now. It needs to go up to 16 euros an hour. We are in league with the trade unions in this country to make this happen in the next couple of years. It needs to happen. Also because if you raise the minimum wage, you raise the whole building. You also raise the situation of other people. And again, let me stress this, for a person on minimum wage or benefits, 100 euros a month can make a huge difference in their lives. Hold on to that thought. It might not make a lot of difference in your life. It certainly wouldn't make any difference in my life. But for people on a minimum wage or on benefits, this could be life-changing. Let's change their lives for the good.
So I also like to talk to you about climate action. There seems to be real support for climate action, but our politics fall behind. How is that possible, Bernie Sanders?
Well, let me give you some, the bad news and the good news. The good news, not because I think of particularly pleasant reasons, is given all that the world has experienced in the last several years, especially this last summer, where you have seen record-breaking heat in China, in Iran, in the United States, where you have had unprecedented levels of terrible forest fires in Washington, D.C. I'll never forget the day that we were breathing disgusting, filthy air coming from Quebec, Canada. So there's terrible fires. My own state of Vermont experienced the worst flooding that it's had in 100 years. And this is going on all over the world. And people who may have doubted climate change are seeing it with their own eyes. And more people are demanding that we act. And that's the good news. The bad news is that Holland, no matter what it does, cannot do it alone. Even a large nation like the United States cannot do it alone. This is really an issue where the entire world is in it together, whether we like it or not. We are on the Titanic, all right? We're on the Titanic and we're heading out to sea. And whether we avoid that iceberg or not depends upon international cooperation.
And that's the hardest part.
And that is a very difficult part. Now, what I am trying to do, in fact, I just met with the ambassador from China very recently, is to make it clear, does the United States have differences of opinion with China? Yes. Are we concerned about various aspects of Chinese policy? Yes, we are. But at the end of the day, China is now the major carbon emitter in the world. And we are going to have to work together. And they understand this. They understand that they have invested incredibly heavily in sustainable energy, wind, solar. They have more electric vehicles than any other country on earth. All right? But what we have got to do is try to get beyond politics and understand that we are in this together and move very aggressively to cut carbon emissions, or else we're not going to have much of a planet for our future generations.
Just what Bernie said is extremely important. If you look back at the conferences, the climate conferences we had in the last couple of years, we reached an agreement last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. We reached an agreement the year before in Glasgow. Why? Essentially because the United States with John Kerry, the Chinese with Xi Jinping, and the European Union, and I had the honor to lead the delegation of the European Union, came together on this issue. That's how we got a global agreement on moving forward on tackling the climate crisis. But if we fail, and I refer to what Bernie said earlier, if we fail to get the fossil fuel industry off the subsidies they're still getting, because also in this country, the fossil fuel industry is still getting massive subsidies, massive subsidies. If we fail to change the logic that major oil companies only think in terms of the interest, short-term interest of the shareholders, and never take the interest of the planet in consideration. If you look at what Exxon did today, another $60 billion US spent on shale gas investment, I find it incredible. If you look at Shell's investment portfolio, I think they're investing not more than 8% of their total investment portfolio in future energy, sustainable energy resources. That is, in fact, condemning that company to slowly die off, because the future is not in fossil fuels. So if they want a future outside of fossil fuels, these companies have to start investing massively into renewables. And if they don't want to do it, I think the public authorities have the duty to push them into that direction. First of all, by taking away fossil fuel subsidies now.
So now I think it's a good moment to bring up the fact that the two of you are a little bit older than I am. Just a little bit. And I was wondering, what can you learn from the new generation?
Outside of my kids, one of the more inspiring things that I've experienced in the last many years is having the privilege of running for President of the United States and then being able to go to virtually every state in our country to campaign. And what I will tell you, it's important for you to understand this, that despite all of the many problems that we do have in the United States, we have a younger generation today that is the most anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic generation in the history of our country. It is a generation of young people who are more involved in the political process, not enough, but a lot more than used to be the case, in addressing issues like climate, and economic and social and racial injustice. So the good news is that I think we are seeing in the United States and around the world, I think, Frans, you would probably agree with me, that globally, probably the real energy that is coming in climate activism is in fact coming from the younger generation, dragging along the older generation, because rightfully so, they are worried about what this planet will look like for their kids and their grandchildren. So I am very optimistic in what I see in the idealism and the activism of the younger generation.
You know, if you just take a minute to look back on the pandemic, young people did everything we asked them to do. And they didn't do it for themselves because they were not that vulnerable. They did it for us. That was the most inspiring show of solidarity I have seen in many, many years. And they suffered for it. If you look at the healthcare situation, the mental health care situation in the Netherlands, so many young people are suffering. And they're suffering because they really took a hit for us during the time of COVID. Isn't it just right that we pay that back in showing solidarity with them about their future?
Being good ancestors?
I want us to be good ancestors. I mean, we're always proud of our ancestors. Oh, I love to refer my two granddads who were coal miners. I'm genuinely proud of them, of what they achieved. They brought me where I am. Without them, I wouldn't be here. And then I think, how will my grandchildren think about me when it's time for them to reflect? Will they say, yeah, my granddad brought me into this horrible crisis. We're now fighting over water and food with other people on this planet because that's our future if we don't change our ways. And I believe we have this unique opportunity with your generation to now really change the direction of this planet. The climate crisis is the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced. That's the bad news. The good news is it's a challenge we can handle if we act now.
You want to respond? No, yeah. I think these are wonderful last words, right? It's a compliment for the audience, for the next generation.
That's the most elegant way somebody has ever said to me, get the hell out of my stage.
So that's why I would like to ask you to give him a warm hand. Frans Timmermans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frans Timmermans. So I have two special guests for you up next. You already met them backstage, but I'll introduce them to you as well. We have two special guests tonight who would like to ask a question to Bernie Sanders as well. They have the privilege to ask a question. The first one is Berkan Kartal. He is representative of young workers at the Netherlands Trade Union Confederation, or FNV in Dutch. And besides being a student, he works at a distribution center and fights for the rights of workers there. And the second guest is Faiza Ulassen, Head of Climate and Energy at Greenpeace, the Netherlands. Who wants to start?
I'd say ladies first.
Thank you, very elegant. Senator Sanders, one of your red lines in your book is about, and you've been also mentioning it tonight, is about the wealth a small number of people have. If you look at the stats, it seems that the more money you have on this planet, the more you pollute. The top 1%, richest people globally, emit twice as CO2 as the poorest 50% on the planet. So imagine a small group of billionaires, millionaires, pollute twice as half the world population. My question to you is, how can we address this?
Well, thank you for raising that question. Because what it touches on is the fact that the people who are suffering the most from the results of climate are the people who have nothing to do with the problem. They're sitting in Southern Africa, Latin America. They're no longer able to grow their crops because the land is too dry. They can't find clean water to drink.
Some, if I may say, some of them aren't even born yet.
Some of them are not even born yet. And that is the real tragedy. What the industrialized world has done, led by people at the head of these fossil fuel companies, is to destroy a world, and the people most affected are the poorest people on earth. So what do we do? Well, you do a couple of things. First of all, what I'm happy to tell you is that in the United States, and I'm sure you're aware of this, in a number of states, including Minnesota, I think in California, a number of cities, there are lawsuits now being taken against the fossil fuel industry. And the basis of the lawsuit is to say, you lied. You have lied for decades. You knew what your product was doing to the planet. And as a result of your lies, there is hundreds and hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in damage, in storms, in drought, in extreme weather disturbances. And now you're asking the taxpayers of Holland or the United States to pick up the tab. Well, guess what? You caused the problem, you're gonna pay for that problem. We're holding you accountable. I mean, that's number one. Number two, the industrialized world has a moral obligation to help the poorest countries on earth who are suffering from a problem that they did not cause. And thirdly, of course, as Frans indicated, we have, as a world, got to move as aggressively as we can if we are going to save or allow your generation and your kids' generation to live healthy and happy lives. This is what we call in the United States the existential threat. We're talking about whether or not human beings will be able in years to come to actually survive on this planet. We have no choice, no rational choice, but to act aggressively and tell the fossil fuel industry their day has come and gone.
Thank you for that. I have another question. I've been working for Greenpeace now for more than 12 years, and I encounter the power of big corporations on a daily basis. And one of the narratives that has been incredibly persistent from big corporations is, don't force us to take any responsibility for us destroying the planet, or else we will leave, take jobs, and so on. It's a form of blackmail, and even though I don't think we have the issues in terms of financing from big corporations, going to political parties like you have in the United States, I do see civil servants, politicians buying into that, some media as well, almost in a way that they're taken hostage by this narrative. So my question to you is, what would your message be to these politicians and civil servants who feel that pressure?
Well, to begin with, this is what we call corporate blackmail. It's what we refer to as corporate blackmail. And you're quite right, that's exactly what they're doing. So they're saying to working people, you have a good job now in the oil industry, okay, and these people, you, want to get you to lose your job. That's what she's doing, working overtime, trying to get you to lose your job. So what do we do? And by the way, if she's successful, we're going to move to the United States or someplace else. So, I mean, I think for a start, and it's easier said than done, admittedly, the world has got to come together and say that that is not acceptable. You know, you're not going to shut down in Holland and move to the United States because we don't want you either. All right. Number two, this angle of threatening workers with their jobs is a potent argument. It works. And what our job is to make it clear that as part of our broad transition away from fossil fuels, we are going to protect those workers. If you're a worker in the fossil fuel industry trying to feed your family, you are not my enemy. My enemy is the CEOs of those companies and the board of directors of those companies. And our job is to say that if in the transition you lose your job, we're going to guarantee you another job, going to guarantee you income, and make you whole. We do not hold you accountable for what the CEOs of your industry are doing. We're going to protect your livelihood.
Thank you, Faiza, for your questions. Berkan, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, so I, like many of my peers, I'm a highly intuitive and emotional person who strives to drive systemic changes for social, for environmental, and for economic justice. Recently, I also joined the union, and I participated in strikes, and I attended shareholder meetings. And you also talk about this concentration of power and concentration of ownership and incredible power. And we also experience this as I work at the Netherlands' largest supermarket chain. My question is, how do you view the role of unions in this time of crazy concentration of ownership?
I see unions, to be honest with you, in the forefront of that fight. I am a very, very strong believer in the trade union movement because, as I think you well know, individually you have no power in demanding decent wages and benefits from your employer. But if people stand together, they can get economic justice. And what I'm very happy to tell everybody here, because it's one of the most positive and exciting things that has happened in America in many, many years. We are seeing a major revitalization of the trade union movement. We're seeing it in blue-collar jobs, we're seeing it in white-collar jobs, we're seeing it in jobs in between, we're seeing it among young people. Incredibly, in the last several years, hundreds of Starbucks shops have been organized. We're seeing organizing taking place at Amazon. We're seeing organizing taking place among graduate students on college campuses whose teaching skills have been exploited. We're seeing nurses organizing and striking, not only for better wages, but for decent nurse-patient ratios so they could do their jobs. In my city, where I live, resident doctors, people who graduated medical school, were working in the hospital, organized the union because they were being exploited. And right now, as we speak, this moment, there is probably the most important strike going on in many, many years. And what is going on is the United Automobile Workers, the UAW, is taking on the three major automobile companies, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. And they are taking them on the basis of corporate greed. What you got are CEOs who are making $20, $30 million a year, while workers for the company at the bottom are making $16, $17. In the last 20 years, in inflation accounted for dollars, workers are earning 30% less. So what they are saying to the American people is, we're not only fighting for ourselves in the automobile industry, we're fighting for every worker in America. And you know what? Recent poll shows 3/4 of the American people support the UAW in their strike.
Now, I also would like to know, since you talked about companies lying, like fossil fuel industry, tobacco industry, for workers who believe their employer is making false claims, who's not holding up to those claims, how could unions assist those workers in holding the companies accountable?
Well, you have, and again, I don't know terribly much about the nature of employer-employee relationship here in Holland, But if you have a good union contract and the employer breaks that contract, the union has the right to take them to court, to labor authorities, and in the worst case, to strike on those issues if there is a widespread breaking of a contract. But once again, what we're seeing in the automobile strike, we recently saw with the Teamsters in the United States, when you stand together, all right, you have power. We need more workers to stand together, to organize unions. We need more unions to stand up and fight for their rights, because when they fight for their workers, they're really fighting for everybody in society in terms of decent wages and benefits.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions, Berkan Kartal and Faiza Ulazen. And now to close off this meeting, I will give the floor to you. We have time for some questions. Like I said, I don't think everyone can ask a question. But I would also like to say first, a question is a short sentence with a question mark. This way we can have more questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. We have people walking around with the mic in white t-shirts. They're everywhere. You know what? Let's start with the people in the back. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, is goed.
And mention your name as well.
I'm over here. So you go to a lot of... In the middle.
There.
You go to a lot of town halls in the US with mostly working class people. And I think a lot of people here are highly educated. And a lot of voters for the Labour left party in the Netherlands are highly educated. What would you advise to Frans Timmermans be to get the workers in the Netherlands to join the ticket?
Yeah, so how can you get the working people in the left and green movement instead of only the highly educated people? In the Netherlands, we have a lot of highly educated people who vote for the left and green parties. Yeah.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think the answer, from my perspective, in the United States, is to explain and campaign amongst working people so that they understand that in the United States, the Republican Party is the anti-worker party. To explain that in the United States, the Republican Party, but not all, but most Republicans in Congress support major cuts in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education. Most Republicans, virtually all, support more tax breaks for billionaires. And it is important that on the other side, that the Democrats begin to stand up and make it clear which side they are on. And one of the important developments that we have seen in recent years is President Biden went to that UAW picket line to make it clear that he is on the side of workers. So I think what we have got to do is have that debate, which party represents the working class of America, and if we have that debate, we're going to win.
And join them, right? Yes, there. I was looking for the one with the microphone.
Sorry, yeah. Hi, Bernie. My name is Ines. We've been talking a lot about social justice and climate crisis. And one of the core roots of those two is the livestock industry. It's destroying our planet, it's destroying climate, it's destroying nature, it's abusing workers, and it's abusing animals. So my one question to you is, do you agree that we should stop the livestock industry and help farmers towards a more animal-friendly, plant-based and organic agriculture?
If we should support plant-based agriculture instead of the livestock, the animals, move towards a more plant-based economy.
I don't know that you could do it overnight, but I think that's a direction that we do want to go. I will tell you this, that in general, in my state, I don't know really how it is in Europe at all, My state has historically been an agricultural state, mostly, by the way, dairy, but not all. We have a lot of vegetable farmers as well. And all over America, what we're seeing is the decline in small family-based agriculture and the growth of corporate agriculture. And we have got to be very firm. And when that happens, rural communities die when family farmers go out of business. So I personally am very, very supportive of doing everything that we can to protect family-based agriculture. To the degree that we can move to organic agriculture, that will be a major, major step forward.
Up there, yes, up there. And mention your name.
Okay. Thank you for being here, that first. We notice in democracies all over the world that we no longer have control over the major companies in our economies. They have become global. How do we as democracies retain power over these global companies if they are no longer bound by our boundaries, by our borders?
That is a great question. And clearly, what is happening, the same companies in the United States that are destroying our environment, who are exploiting our workers, are doing the same all over the world. And what we have seen in the last number of years as a result of bad trade agreements is companies shutting down in the United States because they had to pay union wages and move to countries like Mexico and China where they are ruthlessly exploiting their workers. I will never forget, as long as I live, some 25, 30 years ago, going to Mexico and going to an area of Mexico which is called the Maquiladora area. It's a special zone where they welcome foreign corporations. And you go to this zone and you see all these beautiful, modern, new factories, American factories, European factories. And you go and you talk to the workers. I'll never forget this. They were literally living in cardboard boxes. You know, when you get a refrigerator, and you get this big cardboard box, they were living in that. No drinking water, and maybe one light bulb in the area, being paid 25 cents an hour back then. It's changed a little since then. But the point is, and this is where our struggle becomes difficult, they are an international force. There is no longer, in many cases, national companies. They are international companies, and governments around the world, whether it is tax policy. You raise taxes in Holland, they're going to flee and go to another country. And they're going to put their money in a tax haven in Bermuda or the Cayman Islands. So this is where the entire global community is going to have to come together to tell them they got to pay their fair share of taxes, that they cannot continue to destroy the environment. But you're quite right. What we have is a global problem which has gone beyond national politics in many respects.
Shall we take one last question? Where? Oh, we have the last question over here.
Yes, hi. On November 12th, we're organizing here the March for Climate and Justice. And I was wondering, what do you see as the crucial role for social movements and protests such as this one when enforcing social change?
So what's the role of social movements to create change?
It is extraordinary. It's the future of the world. In other words, what we all have to do is to have the courage to organize in an intelligent way with an intelligent agenda that says to the people in power, and by that I mean the heads of these large multinational corporations, Wall Street, the other major financial institutions, that this planet and this world belong to all of us and not just them. So educating and organizing in Holland, in the United States, and as we just heard a moment ago, internationally, If we don't do that, I worry about the future of the planet, and I worry about the increased growth of oligarchy. So organizing and activism is exactly what we have got to do to save this planet.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Bernie Sanders. Thank you very much for all being here, for this conversation with Bernie Sanders, for asking 4 wonderful questions as well. If you want to, you can buy the book, It's Okay to be Angry About Capitalism, of course, afterwards. Thank you for being here and enjoy the rest of your evening.